Right. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. I'm Councillor Webb, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting of the Children Education Communities Policy and Scrutiny Committee in the place of the regular chair, Councillor Baker, who has taken a week off, I believe, which she's very much entitled to. On the screen, you will note that we've got several councillors, and any councillor is denoted by CLLR at the front of their name. The members on screen at the moment are committee members. There'll also be other councillors who join the meeting as executive members as and when the time allows. And we will also be joined by various members who are presenting items to us, various officers and other members of the public who want to communicate with us. So we'll kick off with the agenda. We've got sort of three main items today. The first thing is declarations of interest. So does anyone have any new declarations of interest at the moment? I will just declare, as I've done before, that I am a teacher, and as we're talking about education recovery in York, I do hope that I am part of that, even a small part. The next is the minutes of the last meeting. Does anyone have any particular things they'd like to raise about either accuracy or any issues with those minutes? No, I will inform members of the public that if councillors do have questions, they will raise their virtual hands. So if you suddenly wonder why I'm asking particular people particular questions, you might not see those hands, but I will. And then just for committee members to aid their memories, if you have a supplementary question, something, just give us a wave. Just one thing that I would like to point out about the minutes of the last meeting was on page 2 of your pack, there's several bullet points relating to the finance quarter 3 monitoring report. And the 5th bullet point there talks about out of town placements, and there's been a success in moving children back into York. We are going to discuss an item, not tonight, but at a future meeting about the overspend. Well, we're going to talk about the home to school transport, and it's been brought to our attention by CSMC that we could do to look at the wider overspend in this portfolio area. So what I'm suggesting is that actually in that September meeting, when we look at that home to school transport, we expand that item to look at the overspend as well. Has anyone got any issues with that? I just thought I'd raise it now. Councillor Fitzpatrick?
No issues with that. It just on that same page, really. Just to note, I know we've got Helen with us, so possibly it'll be addressed when we look at that. The first bullet point, the position with Danesgate, suggested that the head teacher be invited to a future committee to meet the committee and the inclusion review, that sort of thing. But I imagine that will all come up later on.
Yes, and another point about that, Councillor Fitzpatrick, is it's not been circulated with these minutes, because I think it was very much in draft form as these minutes and these papers we've put together. But after the meeting, we will get the work plan that has now been finalised after our last meeting, where we set up the work plan for the next year. So that will come out, and that does include looking at the inclusion review again in a bit more detail.
Good, thank you.
And welcome to Councillor Barker, who is the other member of the committee who's just arrived. Good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. One of these things called a day job that does preclude me, and I'm on the far side of Harrogate, so it was a bit of a mad dash.
Yes, so, no worries. Day jobs, you got to love them. I certainly do. Okay, does anyone have any other issues with minutes or anything like that? No, perfect. Okay, item 3 is public participation, and unfortunately we don't have any members of the public who want to talk to us. And I think it's probably worth reminding all councillors, I think it would be good if we could get some members of the public to comment on various things. Maybe it could be under the general remit of the committee or specific items. And so I'd ask everyone to just really speak to local residents, see if they want to raise any issues with us, because it's a good opportunity to get the residents' voices heard. Okay, we're going to move straight on then to item 4, which is YSAB Education Recovery, which is York Schools and Academies Board. That's what YSAB stands for. So to speak on this item, we've got Helen Wynne, who's the CEO of the Hope Learning Trust, who has just joined us on screen. Hello, Helen.
Good evening, everybody.
So I believe, Helen, you've got a bit of a presentation to go through with us, and I'm hoping that someone who knows how technology works is going to sort that out for us now. I believe you've already tested it, which is always good.
Yeah, I'm going to do that myself, hopefully. So just bear with me 1 second.
Perfect. And then I think if we go through the presentation, we allow Helen to go through that, and we save questions to the end, that'd be great. Yes, Helen, we can see that. So over to you. Talk to us about recovery.
Thank you very much. So thank you for inviting me to the meeting and giving us the opportunity to share some exciting plans for the future of our young people in York and children in York. One of the things I think is just quite important at the beginning to say is that we want this strategy to be positive for everybody, and it's about the children's future and how we shape things moving forwards. Rather than dwelling on what's happened. So we decided to change the name to Education Futures, and we're actually having a logo design so that we can tag things with this as we go through the next few years and take things forward. The word recovery sort of can have some connotations, and it increasingly is having connotations of negativity and children being way behind. Now, we're not under any illusions. We do have some children, and a significant minority of children, who have really significant gaps in their learning, but they need to have the confidence that we can get them to the right place quickly if we've got the right strategies in place and looking forward to the future. And I think it's probably fair to say that we've all changed during the course of the pandemic, so nobody's life is going to be quite the same as we move forwards. And so we've acknowledged that in the work that we've done. So just some basic aims here. This is about developing a citywide education plan as we return to face-to-face education. And of course, when I wrote this, we hadn't had the government announcements that we've had over the past few days. So we're hoping that in September, we'll not be back to completely normal education, but we will have far more face-to-face. Supporting our schools and families to catch up over any lost learning, and in a sort of quick and meaningful way, to rethink our education offer for the future so that we meet the needs of our children. And I mean that in a holistic sense, not just for the job market, but them developing properly as young people, and to have an integrated approach with services working together. And actually, this probably is the biggest and most important part to make all of the other parts work well. Because of our relationships in York that I'll touch on in a minute, I think we can be highly successful with that. So we've got a team. We've got a team of representatives in our Education Futures group, and I have to say that this team has been growing as I've been working with different people and think actually we probably need representation in this area. That the team's grown, it will grow as we go along. So we've got head teachers from primary, secondary and special phases. Just recently, Karen Young, our head of virtual school, will be joining us as well, which I think is will be great to have her voice around the table. We've got local authority representatives and MAT representatives. And that's one of the great things about YSAB. I've not been working in York for very long, just over a year. But one of the things that struck me straight away is how close-knit York is, and also within education, it's all working together, which is obviously really good. So just on the working together, this is not exhaustive, and this will get bigger. But we've got all of these different organisations that have got strategies and kind of small or maybe larger pots of money, and it's about making sure we get best value and tying everything together. So for example, you know, when we're talking about well-being, it's really important that we make sure that our strategies are aligned with whatever public health is doing and that we're supporting each other in these things. If we've got some organisations that have got a lot to offer, but sometimes find it difficult getting into schools because there are so many competing priorities. We can use this as a vehicle to make sure that we get the right resource to the right place at the right time. So that will be incredibly powerful. And of course, our early years settings, I'm a big believer that if we make sure we get things right in the beginning, then that will solve problems further down the line and will give children every chance to succeed. So we do need to make sure that we address gaps with our older children and young people. But we've got to get early years right. And probably it's fair to say that is a group of children who have suffered significantly because of that key development in their education around reading and their social development. So I think that's a cohort that have just come out of early years, who went through early years during the height of the pandemic. We need to be really careful that we fill their gaps very quickly. So this is the approach, and I think we need to keep it simple. This came from EEF. So Kevin Collins, when he was working on recovery, and obviously he's not in that, didn't stay in that role for very long, but he came from EEF, and this approach around high quality teaching, targeted academic support, and then wider strategies. It's simple, it's effective, and it means that whatever we're doing, we can link it to these key areas so that it keeps things tidy for people. So we have actually launched a survey across the city to all children, all parents and carers, and all school staff, asking them for their views. Nothing was attached to individual schools, so we don't break it down like that. We just wanted a city-wide view, and it's just hot off the press. So we're going through the data, and we'll do a report to send back to you, so we can pull out the themes from that. We had to put it together very quickly because we wanted the information quickly. But what it sort of is excellent just on first view. The teachers that have responded, for example, there are some very specific CPD needs, professional development needs that are coming through that, for example, just flicking back very quickly, our Teaching School Hub and the CPD strand of that will be able to support with that. So, and then again, in the wider strategies around wellbeing, for example, as I said before, linking with public health. There's just some examples here of support from central government. There will be money allocated to children for tutoring. So that goes into targeted intervention and training for early years staff that again would go into the first strand. So there are lots of kind of strings and threads that we need to pull together to get into this bigger picture. But what can often happen with these things is that people get lost in the strategy. So if we keep the simplicity there, I'm quite sure that it would be successful. When I've been meeting with people from different organisations to pull things together, they're so enthusiastic about it, and they like the idea of there being a sort of clear communication strategy around it because of the work that they're already doing. So I've got a bit of a timeline here. So we've had the survey. One of the things that that we think is important that we address is we want to be in a position as a city, and then pushing out wider than the city, but initially as a city, where we have a common language around teaching and learning so that we can help each other in our schools. That does not mean that every school has to organise their teaching and learning or have the same approach. It absolutely doesn't mean that. But the common language around it is quite important, we think. So we're looking at the moment at at a strategy called walkthroughs, which puts common language around teaching and learning, and it's not in any way restrictive. So we're looking to see if we can subscribe to that for all of our school staff in York, and then to put CPD, professional development training program in place for staff. And then they would be able to decide the areas that they need professional development, and they would be able to access that. So that's one of the things. Another theme that's coming through is around speech and language, and we're looking to see if we can push out aspects of the early talk for York, so that at least we're in a position where we can screen all children who are in early years settings of any kind, so that we can then put a set of strategies in place for children if there are any issues that arise from that. And probably reading and writing will come out, we're anticipating, so having some different strategies around that. So the survey's gone out, we've just got the results in that we're analysing at the moment, and then we'll start looking at phase 1 of the plan. I don't think we can do like a 5-year strategy at this point. I think it's about putting in place phase 1, then evaluating where we are once the children have settled back into school in the autumn term, and then moving forwards with our next phases once we've evaluated. We do know, I'm just going to stop sharing the screen if that's okay. We do know that children who are at any kind of disadvantage or are vulnerable or have SEND, generally, we know that nationally and locally, the gaps just got bigger and bigger and bigger for many of those children. And we have to do something about that. We can't be in a situation where we allow that to continue. So there are no silver bullets or quick answers around this. We need to really start doing some serious problem solving so that we can make sure that we've got the right strategies in place for those children as we move forward. And I believe that one of the biggest influences is actually if every single lesson they go into is really well taught. I'm not saying it's the most exciting lesson in the world, but it's just really well taught. Then that is going to make a massive difference to those children if we put the right interventions in place to match up with that. So, I've been through that sort of fairly quickly. It's a big project, but I just thought it was good for you to have that outline, and then I'm very happy if there's the opportunity to take any questions from anybody.
Thank you very much, Helen, and please pass on this committee's thanks to YSAB and to all the people that you're working with, because it's not been an easy couple of years in education, and you've worked incredibly hard. So well done. I have got a series of questions. First person up is Councillor Heaton, I think. So, Councillor Heaton.
Thanks, and thanks for that, Helen. Just want to look at the targeted academic support, if we can, just to have a bit deeper look on that. I mean, I used to be a teacher myself back in the long ago before times of 2019, and we did targeted support then. So how's this going to be, different in addition at this point, would we say?
So I can't sort of answer your question entirely, because it depends on the individual, and the government is giving funding for targeted intervention in the form of tutoring. I've done quite a lot of work around this, and sometimes things have worked and sometimes they haven't, because that's how it is. But actually, I think that we're in a position now in education where we can be far more forensic than we ever have been before. So quite often interventions have been, oh, there's a problem with reading, here's a reading package, let's put the children on that reading package. Actually, it might not be the right thing. So it's about finding out what the issue is in the first place, what is needed to address that, and being very specific. So the word targeted, I think, is the key word in this, which possibly makes it different to things that have happened previously.
Yeah, sorry. I was just thinking, it sounds like individualized is another word you can look at with that as well.
It is, but it may be that you've got 4 children, for example, who have the same need. Now, I guess you could say that's individualized, but it's more about making sure that there's the right intervention in place there. So it could be that 20 children need that intervention. That's fine. But we don't want 5 others joining them that don't need that intervention, but need something different.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I guess that's the angle that we need to come at.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, obviously, this could be a large scale thing, obviously, if, we're looking at larger groups of students. I mean, it's obviously difficult in education at the moment. What's the sort of additional capacity that we've got in education for extra targeted support? Because, it's got to come from somewhere, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. So as I said, the government are putting some money in, and there should be some other recovery bits and pieces of money. And as well, I think it's about, this is the schools have to take responsibility for this. The idea of this is that we do whatever we can to support schools, but actually it's about schools looking at the capacity they've got, or just very simplistically, if you've got members of staff doing X, but Y is going to be have more impact, switch them from X to Y. And I think that's the way that schools are going to have a look at their resource, because there's not going to be a bottomless pit of money, even if there's more money that comes in.
Yeah, and it comes down to time as well in terms of the resource, doesn't it? When you're talking about, teacher capacity, and if you're switching them from one aspect to the other, doesn't it?
Obviously, with any resource, we need to think about that in people's contracts, etc. But one of the things that in a lot of schools, there are people who would like to do a few extra hours and do some tuition in those extra hours, and if the money is there to pay for them, or however that's done. I think it's when days are stretched and there's no additional resource put in, that's when it doesn't work.
Interesting, yeah. And just one more at the moment. I mean, obviously we've got announcements that have come out as well. I mean, how's all this going to be impacted, do we think, by high levels of isolation? And obviously potentially that ballooning.
I mean, I wish I could answer your question and tell you exactly what's going to happen. But the government have made the decision that they want to try and get schools back to normal as much as possible. I do think that them not being, from an educational point of view, I'm not a scientist or a health expert, so I can't comment on that, but I can from an educational point of view. From an educational point of view, it will be much easier when schools aren't restricted by, particularly secondary schools, by the way they're organising their schools. So I think that will help tremendously in September, and we just need to keep our fingers crossed that it can happen.
All right, thanks very much.
Yeah, I think, Helen, I don't envy any head teacher who's been looking at announcements from Gavin Williamson whenever he sends them out. I'm going to go to Councillor Fitzpatrick next.
Thank you. And can I say welcome, Helen, to you. I'm delighted to see you as chair of YSAB and to be joining us tonight. I suppose we're a slightly well-qualified team here, really, because I must declare that I'm also a teacher, an ex-advisor and an Ofsted inspector as well. So I want to look at, well, I want to agree with you, first of all, in what you're saying about early years being absolutely key. And speech and language there really being so important, that those stepping stones have to be there. So that's a given. In terms of the approach and high quality teaching, what I would want to see there is high quality teaching for all. I'm sure that's what's intended by that. And the reason why I say that is because so often when I used to inspect in schools, I would see that the least able are being catered for or taught. I say catered for, not necessarily taught, because they're not teachers, but by teaching assistants looking after the least able. If that's the regular pattern, then the high quality teaching doesn't go to those necessarily that need it most. So a kind of rotation. So sometimes the class teacher might be with the least able. The high level teaching assistant might be with the rest of the class, if you like. Do you think that might be the case, that that high quality teaching will be delivered by teachers in the main to the majority of children.
Yeah, so it's not it's not our remit as such to say how people organise their schools or
but your opinion.
But in my opinion, I absolutely agree with you. You know, when I became head and there was significant underachievement. I mean, very, very significant underachievement. So you take the classes which have the most complex needs and you put your best teachers on them, because those children deserve the best teachers that the school has. And then we need to make sure that all of our teachers are of a minimum standard. And I'm not talking about sort of any kind of Ofsted gradings. I'm talking about this is what we expect as a minimum within our classroom. So I guess the thing around this strategy and the Teaching School Hub and everything is to give everybody the resource they need in order to get their school to that point. But yes, you're absolutely right. We do need to make sure that we've got properly trained professionals in front of the children, and that teaching's of a high standard.
Can I just ask one more thing, really? Clearly, NEETs is always been an interest of mine, and I think we all recognise in the current climates with the older pupils possibly who were slightly even disaffected before all of this, that might be an issue. Can we just have an assurance that that particular group of children that might be not quite on the radar will be definitely identified and, as far as possible, catered for either in education, employment or training?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we can do moving forwards, and this is all a question of resource because we only have limited resource, but and obviously the local authority, we're all working very closely together, but I think there's something about making sure that we track and identify young people early on so that we can avoid the NEET situation as we move forwards, and to make sure we've got the right provision in place. And actually, just going back to your previous point about the teaching for all, if we get the teaching right for our children with SEND or who are vulnerable or have got gaps or are at any disadvantage, that means we get the teaching right for everybody else as well, because they need high quality teaching. The rest of the children aren't going to suffer because they're getting high quality teaching.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick. Councillor Fenton, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Helen. I'll admit to not being a teacher, so
that's fine.
Forgive me, my questions are not that well informed. Just picking up on the sort of 3 points in the approach. The third one is wider strategies, enrichment, well-being. Obviously, we know that initially the proposals put forward by Kevin Collins were quite ambitious in scope, and what ultimately came to pass was perhaps less so. And yeah, I entirely understand that with limited resource and limited capacity within school to deliver the approach, to what extent do you think there will be the capacity for the enrichment and well-being and extending the school experience aspects of the approach, and recognizing that schools have a finite capacity? Could others be drawn in to support that and to be involved in that? We've got, in a later agenda item, we're hearing about things that the Theatre Royal have been doing in terms of holiday activities. So there's perhaps capacity beyond beyond the school system, and I just sort of wondered what the kind of emerging thinking was on that third strand of the approach.
Yeah, so actually probably and again it's really early just looking at things from the survey, but the thing the children missed most was being with their friends, social activities and sort of enrichment type activities. That won't be any surprise. Schools actually do this really, really well. You know, I think all of our schools have really great enrichment programs, or did. and those enrichment programs have been restricted over the last 18 months. So I'm sure that side of things will kind of bounce back. As well, we've got great universities in the city that are full of graduates and undergraduates that probably would be quite keen to get involved with our young people, to do some sport with them or art or different things as well. And one of the things we've talked about as well, just talking about theatres, etc. That is an industry that has really been hit hard. So I think that if we can help to make that more buoyant and get people back into the habit of doing that, and children in the habit of experiencing things, then that can only be a good thing. So again, this is about joining up the approach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fenton, and thank you, Helen. Yeah, no, you've got at least 3 teachers on the committee, and you know we get very excited when we get to talk about education, because it doesn't happen very often. Just a question from me, really, well, a couple of questions. One, I suppose, is sort of following on from what Councillor Fenton's just said. You mentioned earlier about it'd be good for sort of you to coordinate that working together approach, and working with partners, and working with you've mentioned charities, and then we've just talked about theatre and things like that. I suppose it's potentially a simple question, but how do people actually know that you exist, and how do they get in contact with you, things like that? Do you want to answer that? Yeah,
I'll answer that. So I think we need to think about how that works, if I'm honest, because I'm not a project manager and I don't have any resource. So this is something that we've got to make. This is something that we've got to think about simplistically, how we can make things happen. So I think this is about our communication strategy and being able to label things under this banner so that we can then promote it out. So it's easier around the teaching side, because we've already got those avenues set up, and with our schools, etc. I think that third strand is going to be the hardest one, and Maxine and I will work together with the group to see what the most efficient way of doing that is.
We do have existing partners in the city that we want to join up with this piece of work. So there is the Cultural Education Partnership, REACH, which represents our cultural partners across the city. We've also, as well, obviously built quite a few contacts through the work that Tim and Barbara have been doing around the Holiday Food and Activities projects. And there are lots and lots of organisations that are working out in the community with children and young people. And what stood out for me, because I was also just initially glancing through some of the information from children and young people who'd replied to the Cross City survey. And it's clear that they're accessing an awful lot of activity, and they're doing that outside of school. So what was interesting was that there were low levels of take-up in terms of some of the in-school activities, but actually higher levels of take-up for children who are accessing sports and clubs in the community. And I think it is what Helen said, it's that two-way communication. Do we actually have those lines of communication open so that the schools know what the children are doing outside of school and what they're accessing, what activities they're accessing, and how that can actually be part of the signposting towards the enrichment programs that the schools can draw on. So, I think what we're not saying is schools need to do everything. Schools need to be part of a partnership, which is also offering some of these wider activities.
Yeah, and I think that it has been heartening to see, actually, I think I've said this previously, that YSAB, this York Schools and Academies Board, while we've got this fractured structure of several different academy chains in the city, although relatively local ones, it's been heartening to see them working together in a positive way, and I think that's been a really, really important step forward, to be honest. My other question, I'll let members of the public know. I did send a little private message to Maxine so that's why she popped on screen. Because Helen, I wasn't sure if you'd be able to answer this specific for York. You've mentioned in terms of current support from central government. Obviously, you've said there's 1 billion for tutoring. I mean, it would be fantastic if all that was coming to York, but I'm not sure it is. So I was wondering if between you might be able to talk a little bit more about actually what share of this is York going to receive, because quite frankly, York traditionally does very poorly when it comes to funding for educational issues.
Yeah, so it's based on the proportion of children that you've got, well, the number of children that are pupil premium, and it's based on 60%. So there's a fixed fee for mainstream schools of £250 something that goes to 60% of the number of pupils on the pupil premium. And then it's in the 500s for special schools. So you're absolutely right that within York, because there aren't, in most schools, there are in some, but in most schools, there are not high proportions of children who are pupil premium, then the funding in York will not be as high as it will in other areas. What I would say to that, though, is that, you know, when we're looking at gaps in children's achievement, if you're in an area where there are a lot of children that attract pupil premium, you're going to have a lot more work that you need to do to get the children to where they need to be. So I don't necessarily think that's unfair. But as a city, we need to think about how we make that money work hard for us. And just so that you know, although that's the funding allocation, and I think there'll be a recovery fund in schools as well, but although that's the funding allocation, it doesn't mean to say it has to be spent on children who attract pupil premium.
No.
It's the way that the school sees best fit around that targeted intervention.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're wanting to ensure, that schools are actually using evidence-based strategies, which, you know, they've done that proper assessment of their school community and what their school community actually needs, and that they're using those evidence-based interventions. As Helen said, one of the things that we've talked about at length, Helen, isn't it, is the development of this common cross-city language around teaching and teaching strategies, and that's what we're most keen to develop, so that we are beginning to really get that shared language about pedagogy and what works. And we're wanting to base that, as Helen said, around some really fabulous resources that some of the schools are already using, but just really saying, let's ground all of our practice in this, because it will actually be easier to move everybody forward with their practice if we develop this common approach.
Thank you. And one final thing, because I did forget it, I apologise. We mentioned earlier on, I think Councillor Heaton spoke about the approach and what this looks like in terms of targeted academic support, and you know, that we in another part of this committee are running a scrutiny topic on children's mental health, and we will have a high number of children in this city who are very, very worried about what is coming up, and you know, that I imagine there will be a certain concern around, okay, we're going to target you with some intervention, and actually that in itself might you know, affect someone's mental health, just thinking, oh, I suddenly need this extra support. So I was wondering, how are we going to get the balance right, Helen? What are we thinking around that?
Yeah, I mean, again, there are no easy answers to this, but I think first of all, it is about being positive, and it's about moving us forward. The pandemic is not the fault of any child in York or across the country or anybody. It's something that has happened to us as a world, and I think it's about the people understanding that if anybody has missed school, then they're bound to have missed things that if they'd been in school that they would have learned. So it's not it's kind of, I guess what I'm saying is, it's taken the personal out of it. And actually, if the messaging around intervention is right, and again, this comes down to the schools, then children will buy into it and actually start asking for it, and thinking, right, I need to get on here. So what is there available to help me in order to do that? So intervention is successful in many schools. Where it is seen as being something that is a negative, or it's because children are behind or aren't as clever as other children, or however the messaging comes across, it's about that's a cultural thing that we can do something about at a high level in York, but it's also within our schools, that we need to make sure that we've got a culture of achievement. And actually all the way through our lives, you know, we're the same. We have areas in our work that we're not as good at in others. We need professional development. Something new comes along that we don't know about, we need professional development. And I think it's about having that narrative with the children as well.
Thank you, Helen. And I think, yeah, that's sort of spot on, really, isn't it? That it's a partnership work at all levels, and excellent. Okay, well, unless anyone has any last minute burning questions, any other teachers want to suddenly appear on the call and no? Excellent. Right. Well, Helen, thank you very much. You don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting if you don't want to, but it's entirely up to you. But thank you for coming along and talking to us.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It was lovely to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks. Okay, folks. I think my sort of suggestion is the next two items. So we've got quite a large item in item 5, and then a relatively small item in item 6 at the end, or at least in terms of number of pages. So I am going to suggest we maybe take a 5-minute break now, and then hammer through item 5 and 6. How does that sound to everybody? Does that sound sensible?
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to just take a 5-minute break now. So it's currently 18:12. So if we come back for about 18, just before 20 past, and we'll kick off. Okay. Thank you, folks. Thank you, tech team, for just pausing that. Apologies, I didn't give you a warning in advance. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I think we are all back in place. I'm just doing a classic count, head counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're just missing Councillor Orrell. If Councillor Orrell can hear me. Ah, there he is. So joining us on screen for item 5 is Angie Padfield, who's the head of York Learning. And as well as that, excuse me, Councillor Daubney, who's the chair of York Learning Improvement Board, former member of this committee. You just can't get enough of us, Councillor Daubney. It's good to see you back. And as well as that, we've been joined on screen by Councillor Smalley, who is an executive member and has a very long portfolio title, I'm sure. Councillor Smalley, what are you executive member for?
All the good bits. Culture, leisure and communities.
Culture, leisure and communities. There you go. Okay. Right. So committee members have got a report on it's the on the strategic plan progress report 2021 for York Learning. So Angie, Councillor Daubney, I don't know who wants to start and introduce this report. Any takers?
It's me. It's me.
Brilliant.
Hi. So thank you very much for reviewing our report for us. Just to say that Charlie sent his apologies, but he had to leave, just so you know that. So obviously, as for all those in education, it's been a very challenging year for York Learning during COVID. And we've had to not only completely change our delivery model so that everything is now online, but also to change and implement different support mechanisms for learners and for tutors. My team has responded with great skill and motivation to help us achieve the continued offer to support not only our existing learners, but many new learners as well, which is a really positive thing that came forward from it. So then looking at the report, I will start on page 3 and I'll just summarize a few key points. So on page 3, if you could look, no, page 15, sorry, if you could look at item 3, where I introduced the governance board information. I would just like to say that, you know, since we last met at Scrutiny, we now have the improvement board now in place. So this enables us to meet the Ofsted requirements that came in a couple of years ago with the new quality improvement framework. Councillor Daubney kindly accepted to take the role as chair, and it has been a challenge recruiting governors, you know, especially during COVID when everybody had a vast array of work to take on. And it was an additional responsibility on top of pressures they already had. But we did succeed in getting a board together, and I've listed where those people have come from within those comments for you. And we've now had about 4 meetings. We are a complex service with many layers, and so it takes a while to really get to know us. And so we're hoping that most people who sit on the board will stay for about 3 years, because we feel that puts you in them in the strongest position to really challenge us. I'll then move on to point 7, which is on page 16. This paragraph highlights to you our financial challenges, whereas some of our provision meets a group of learners who the council have a statutory duty to provide education opportunities to. The funding attributed to this provision can present challenges to our budgets because we are completely self-financed, but there are always sometimes shortfalls as to how we can make that stretch to the learner numbers that we have. This is particularly so within the Routes to Success programme, which is the 16 to 18 NEET group of learners, and the high needs learners, which send with special educational needs and personal learning plans. So at the moment we're over target on those, but we can't refuse people to go onto those programmes, but we're managing everything as best we can. The offer, as I'd just like to point out, for both of them continued throughout lockdowns, and all the learners have continued to be engaged and kept on programme. And then if I could go to page 18, which is paragraph 14, I just really going going back to that fact that we moved everything online, and those with essential skills needs, especially at the lower level, where we look at entry level 1 to entry level 3 and level 1, that was particularly challenging to do online. So if you can imagine, if you've got really low skills and you need to catch them up, to do it remotely is actually quite a big leap to do. And so we have struggled to recruit new learners on those. So we have got lower numbers on the recruitment for those skills, because we've not been able to go out and do the engagements that we normally would have during COVID times. We have managed to retain the learners that we already had engaged with and kept them on board, but it was the recruitment of new learners that we particularly struggled with during the COVID period, which has affected our learner numbers. And then we also, if I take you down to page 22, which is in Annex A, item 3. Usually we would run about 4 job fairs as part of the council, where employers will set up stalls and help promote employment opportunities across the city. We had no employers. This was obviously really difficult to do during COVID. How would you put an event like that on? You couldn't do it within lockdown, etc., etc. And also when we spoke to employers, because we did ask them how they would like to engage with that, most of them said they didn't need a job fair at the moment. They had more than enough applications coming through on any job vacancies they had. And so there was very little appetite for that. So instead, we changed our energies to produce an offer for those who are unemployed, to give them careers guidance and some one-to-one sessions where they could cover key skills, such as know what your skills are, understand how to put a CV together, job searching, applying for jobs, interview skills, and how to thrive in the workplace and those sort of things. And we felt that that was the best response when we weren't able to put job fairs together. And finally, I'd like to draw your attention to page 26, which is section 8. When we last met with you, we reported that we have minimum standards on our apprenticeship programs. And I'm really happy to report that we came out of minimum standards last year, and we are still out of minimum standards this year. And that's all moving really well and on target. I think that's a fantastic achievement considering the challenging year that we have had. If you think we cover a lot of the adult care qualifications and childcare qualifications, and the staff in those environments had many additional hours that they were working and challenging shifts, to still come out of that with a better achievement record than before, I think was exceptional. And I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Angie. I was just going to ask whether Councillor Daubney, did you have anything to add at that point as chair?
Thank you, Chair. Not especially. I think Angie is obviously the expert in the day-to-day detail of all this. It is a very large delivery program, and I think they've done particularly well, as she noted, amongst the staff in carrying forward the services that are delivered through York Learning at a time when clearly you can't meet face to face, and as members of this committee will appreciate, many of the learners are lacking in possibly skills of some kind, maybe in terms of IT and so forth, but also if you add to that the fact you don't meet face to face, and maybe you aren't particularly at ease with the computer and technology, it's actually a great achievement that so much has been achieved through a pandemic when you can't meet face to face.
I think you're spot on there, and I'd just like to open by saying well done, Angie, because I do think that this, as you've alluded to, from an education point of view, this has been an incredibly difficult time to reach out to people who are, in a lot of cases, quite difficult to reach. So it's a good place to start with. Okay, over to some questions. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Angie, for the report. I was wanting to start with a question about the improvement board, and to what extent the board has sort of challenged and guided the way in which York Learning has certainly coped in admirably in the past year, in that through through having that forum, has anything come from that surprised you, or yeah, perhaps caused you to think about the York Learning strategy, and whether it's the extent to which it's sort of, you know, meeting the needs of employers, of learners. It'd just be interesting to see whether sort of how the board has kind of functioned in its coming up to its kind of first year, and what kind of learning you've taken from that.
I've found it incredibly helpful actually to have an employer on the board, another adult education provider, Simon, and all of that, and some of their input and insight has been really useful. Actually, it has changed. We are changing the way we put the strategic plan together for next year due to their input. And I also changed the self-assessment report slightly to make sure that I separately identified all of the COVID impacts that we had, which I send in January to Ofsted, which I'd sort of layered in, but I hadn't separated it as a separate section. And they identified that would probably be really helpful as a person not understanding the report maybe as often as I do, to be able to see it that way. And it is now actually part of the Ofsted feedback to try and separate your information for that. So I thought that was an excellent example of help that they provided me with that. Going forward, they're hoping to get out and meet the learners a bit more and get to know them, and that will help build their knowledge better as to how we're developing and improving ourselves, I think.
Thank you for that. Councillor Heaton.
Thanks. Yeah, just a few from me. I mean, starting off, it's point 10, just English for speakers of other languages. I mean, what are the current numbers we've got there? I noticed later in the papers it said that numbers have increased.
Yes, numbers have increased slightly because we had more refugees arrive who came onto course. Some of them are now moving again out of York, and that may affect the numbers again moving forward. But overall, it's been a growing programme that has been developing really well. And what we've done is expanded it a little bit so that there's now like a family learning for ESOL students as well, so that we can develop, because they come with the aim of obviously developing their English, but there are other aims as well that we would like to help support them with in developing and supporting their children in school. So with family learning courses, and even, you know, looking at different wellbeing courses that we might be able to provide to support the environment that they're in and how they cope with the challenges that they've got at the moment. So some numbers have gone up due to that as well.
Good. I like the idea of the family learning aspect. So what are the sort of like rough numbers we're talking about at the moment then?
Let me just go. Here we go. So yes, they've gone, it's at the moment it's 68 learners doing a mixture of accredited and non-accredited. So it's lower than last year, but it is still really good considering the environment that we've been in, unfortunately. We have been doing some particular work also at the Citadel, cookery lessons, and helping them to develop an online, how to deliver an online cooking session, which they're then moving forward with to sell and introduce to the communities around them, to sort of culturally share, if you like, the way that they live in their language and their culture. So that also has helped.
Great, yeah. And just on
Councillor Heaton,
well,
just before you move on from that point,
yeah.
I was just sort of on paragraph 10 actually, just a little question. I mean, we talked throughout the papers about the learners, and you've just highlighted sort of one group of learners. Could you just give us a brief sort of summary, shall I say, when we say learners, what sort of groups of people is York Learning working with? I should imagine it's quite a range, but
it is. I'll start from the lower end. So the young people that we work with are always 16 plus. So we have a core group of 16 to 18-year-olds that are not ready for college or employment. They don't have the social and emotional skills to be able to move into those directions. And the referrals come from a variety of places like Danesgate, York College, CVS, all sorts of direction of travel. And we support them for a year. We develop their English and math skills and employability and all sorts of people skills and communication skills during that time, so that I think we have about 70% going to a positive outcome from that course, whether it's into employment on an apprenticeship or into the college and further education that way, which I think is an excellent outcome, again, with such a targeted and young group of people who have been quite switched off from education up to that point. We then move into apprenticeships, which could be 16 to 18-year-olds, and again then 19 plus, and we have a variety of apprentices that can be already in job and then doing an apprenticeship to improve their skills, and some of them are easily 40 plus, 50 plus even. We then have my brain's working now, the high needs special educational needs program, which is now from 16 to 24 years. So a young person with special educational needs has the right to be able to stay in education until they are 24 to 25. And so what we help is we work with subcontractors across the city, a whole range of them, which I've listed, I believe, in the report somewhere. And they put on a variety of different types of provisions. So if it was outside, we would use Ad Astra for forestry skills, for example. And if it was about creating a self-employment route to sell a craft that they like to create, would be Blueberry, do pop-up shop and so on. United Response are about cafe skills. And we do a range of programs from that. And so we get funding in and we monitor, regulate and quality assure the whole process to make sure that the learners and the young people get the very best positive and progressive outcomes that they can by doing those programs. We then have the essential skills, if you like, so that's English, maths and IT. That covers everybody from 19 plus. We can't fund, small, not full-time provision for under 19-year-olds from the 19 plus funding. So they have to be 19, and that's the August after the academic year that they were 19 in, and we can fund them from that. We have a range of learners who are learning with us, many, right up to the top end of the scale, even 50, 60 years old, learning their essential digital skills up to level 2 for work, English, maths, entry level up to level 2, usually progressing into GCSEs, which we've been incredibly successful with as well. And then we also have sort of employability related qualifications, so bookkeeping and accounting, childcare and adult care, and all sorts of qualifications like that. We then have the wider community learning programme, which is what maybe some of you relate to traditional adult ed, which is the arts, crafts, wellbeing, exercise classes, which are to help reduce and target isolation and loneliness, make sure people are thinking about their well-being, doing something that gets them out of the house, or gives them something to think on for that's a bit different to normal, or just to develop skills in a particular craft or area of interest. Within doing that, they then have the wider benefits of better mental and well-being health, because they have had a space where they can do something that is quite out of the norm of their day or week. Some people like to learn languages. We have a lot of feedback from learners, and we've put that in our last brochure. I don't know if you've seen that. We've put quite a bit of learner feedback in this time, where they've given much fuller descriptions of the benefits that they've had from doing courses with us. So one learner on guitar, believe it or not, said that he felt like we saved a lot of money to the NHS for the extra support that it gave him a chance to completely get away from the working world into a different world and give himself a different release. The Russian student's comments makes me laugh the most, because he says that he got so passionate by learning Russian that he annoyed his family so much that he had to respond to every question they said in Russian and talked back in Russian on the TV, which I thought was hilarious. So we have all of that going on as well, which is all non-accredited community learning based learning, and a lot of it did go online. And it's done really well. And languages particularly really blossomed during lockdown. A lot of people wanted to learn a language and get in and embrace it. So that's been really positive. And then we have quite a developed counselling programme. So you can start it at level 2. And then you go into the advanced learner loans area, where you can do level 3 and a 2-year level 4 programme. And that enables you then to progress into a university like York St John to get your full degree if necessary.
Wow, you do a lot then.
Yeah.
No, Angie, that's fantastic. And that's, I think, the report says a lot, but actually that really does sort of bring it to life. So sorry for interrupting Councillor Heaton there, but I am going to come back to you now, and then I'll go to Councillor Fitzpatrick afterwards. Councillor Heaton.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Yeah, no, it was point 12. I was looking at there. I mean, we talked about targeted support with YSAB, obviously, before the break, and you've talked about how there's some issues where we're talking about remote learning, where you've got access issues potentially, but obviously there's talk there about the positives of it. So, what's the sort of thinking of the future of remote learning and how this is going to work?
I think it will be a blended model. So for some learners, certainly those that maybe don't like coming out very often and find it difficult to socially engage with others, it really supported their mental health to not have to come to class every day and not have to engage in that way. So there's definitely some room to incorporate that into their personalised plans a bit more and think a bit more out of the box as to how we develop some learning pathways for some of our people but in the world of work, they need to come out and, do things in a different way. So we need to develop them, but we also need to support them. So we'll certainly be continuing with more blended learning. The learners that were on the high needs learning, they all got laptops, and those that were shielding did it fully from online, but as soon as we were allowed to get those back into the classroom, we did, because we felt they were the most in needed of that one-to-one attention. With the Roots programme, we had them back in 3 days a week as soon as we could, because they feel a bit like let loose, if you know what I mean, because they're not in the classroom. They need that routine, they need that contact, and they need that development. And we also connected I worked very closely with Susan Wood to set up a laptop recycling scheme across the city. And Susan did most of the work. I'm not claiming any of the work, but I helped her work out how we could do it, what sort of technology was the minimum requirements for that, so that our learners could then get on a list and get a free laptop that had been recycled to help support them from home if they needed it.
Great, yeah. It's good to hear there's that blended approach, because we talk about the world of work as well. There is going to be most likely a blended approach there as well, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Just the last one. It was point 14, where it's talking about where some were feeling that the digital and the IT skills are too challenging. What happens there to sort of differentiate programs to allow for that greater access, more of a sort of an on-ramp situation for people?
We actually provide great differentiation between all our lessons. I think that the thing that they really struggled with was just to do that online. So in digital skills, particularly, if you think about the fact that you're struggling with a computer, and then people want to talk to you on the computer to help you start your computering, And although you can send them links to programs that will help cover the mouse and the keyboard, if you're not a confident user, you'll often find that they think they're going to do something disastrous, break the machine, and never be able to use it again. And so that it just turns them off straight away. So we got some of the IT sessions back open as soon as we could, so that we just had 2 or 3 in the room just to get them over the initial skills that they needed to then be able to work with us remotely as much as possible. But some did just disengage during that period, some because they had a lot of homeschooling to do. And, you know, a lot of our learners in this bracket of those skills are parents, or they have other responsibilities, they're carers or whatever. And so they found that difficult to do alongside their study. And so we had those challenges too. And I think that my tutors created loads of resources that they would actually post out or were hand delivered after they'd been in isolation, the documents, to shielders and all sorts of things which were based at their level. So in ESOL particularly, there were packs at different levels, at the different individuals level as well, which were then gone through on a one-to-one basis with some learners online or over the telephone, WhatsApp. We used every tool we could think of to just keep people engaged and moving in the right direction.
Excellent. No, thank you. And thank you to the rest of the team as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heaton. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Yes, well, again, well done. I think the whole thing sounds excellent. A really wide-ranging programme. They're very ambitious. I'm particularly pleased that the refugee resettlement bit, although it's slowed, I mean, you're still aware of that and watching that. The other bit that particularly interests me, it relates to what we talked about earlier, in fact, before you were here, really, about the early years bit, and it's the 1 to 2-year-olds and the NSPCC programme. I'm glad to see that mentioned there. Look, Say, Sing and Play initiative, that's really good. And of course, the building into the York offer that they're doing on early talk for York as well. That's really good to build in alongside that. Another area that interests me particularly is NEETs, to make sure that they are all included. And you've got the apprenticeships there. Not that one leads into the other, because we know it doesn't necessarily. I suppose a question would be in terms of ESFA funding that you talk about, the Education Skills Funding Agency, and subcontracting. Just slight alarm bells around subcontracting. You know, I mean, it's great setting stuff up, and that's great. How do you maintain a consistency across the board then? And how much is that monitored internally, or is external moderation part of the funding for this as well?
We actually have an excellent model for subcontracting. I know I'm blowing our own trumpet now, but it is excellent. Colette is the main lead on robustly, if you like, working with the different subcontracting organisations, ensuring that they're fully aware of what a quality cycle is and what the processes are, what outcomes she expects for the learners, how she expects that evidence. We went through quite a big process with the SFA last year about how we subcontract, what we do as part of subcontracting, and they were they confirmed in writing that we could still continue subcontracting, even though they are removing it from some other organisations. They were happy for us to continue with it in the model that we have, due to the framework that we put around it. And we also presented the full framework to our improvement board to make sure that they confirmed they were happy with the processes that we do it with, as part of that ESFA guidance, which requires it now.
So basically you're moderating it?
Yes.
Yeah, they don't come in with external moderators to look at what you're doing, can compare that to elsewhere in the country?
Only during the Ofsted visit. So when the Ofsted came out, they went to see those providers and checked our systems that were in place, and they were more than happy with what we were doing. They felt it was very robust and very it was very clear that it was well supported, and all the subcontractors talked about the support that they got but also we're very happy with the processes that were in place to make sure it was well moderated. And also we had a matrix visit earlier in the year, and they also went and had a look at some of how the advice and guidance was working within them, and they were also happy with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Arrell.
Thank you, Ange, for all of the report. It's excellent and very interesting. Just a query on the jobs fair paragraph that you've put in, and you say that employers have not struggled to fill vacancies this year, which doesn't seem to fit in with other areas of the economy. Have the jobs fairs, have employers at previous jobs fairs used them to fill vacancies that they had then?
Yes, absolutely. They are very popular. They just said that whenever they advertised the job, they would have so many applications during the lockdowns that they just didn't need a job fair. We tried to engage, because obviously the people that are unemployed would have appreciated a job fair, but we need the employers engaged. And what often works well at a job fair is that the individual looking for work gets to chat to an employer. The employer gets to chat to a person and decide, how can talk to them about what the job's about and what's actually involved in it before, anybody's spending time doing application forms and all of the time that takes. You can do it very quickly during a brief chat at a job fair, and that goes down really well with them. But during COVID, they just said one, they didn't have the time, and two, they just didn't need to because they were receiving so many applications, and we just had to, respect that and step back. So what we did was concentrate our time on producing an offer for the people that were looking for work, because that was where the most demand was, and created an employability sort of offer, if you like.
Yeah, you've had to adapt. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we are looking at hopefully returning in October, November for the next job fair. We're just waiting for public health to give us guidance on what they would expect us to have in place to be able to do that.
Thank you. And Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I suppose, following up on that, and this is where I ask you to get your crystal ball out in terms of, as we learn to live with COVID, which we've been told that's what we're doing. Where do you anticipate in terms of demand from learners and demand from employers in terms of looking at addressing filling particular roles that we know are particularly hard to fill at the moment? Where do you see York Learning fitting into that picture? Obviously, it's we've got a number of educational establishments within the city will be thinking about the not the post-COVID world, but the next step, whatever that might be, and trying to gear up so they're ready to meet that need, whether it's from learners or from employers. To what extent is that something you're kind of actively thinking about as you're planning sort of future courses? I don't know, it's an almost impossible question in terms of, well, how can you predict the future, but how are you trying to best guess the future?
We're certainly involved. So I've been working with the skills team with some commitment groups across the city with different, as members of that from the university and the college predominantly. And we're all looking at different areas of aspects. So one of them's on about digital skills. So to make sure people have pathways from entry level right up to degree level so that it can help fill that future need. Another one is around information, advice and guidance. So how do people get that information, advice to find out what is available, and how would they identify where they slotted in and who they should contact for what level of skill do they want? So there's those pieces of work going on at the moment, which are still in work, and we're still working it all out between us. On top of that, I've had lots of discussions with my team. We've done a bit of research around what people's interests may be and where 20 to 30 year olds, what are they looking at the moment? What could be developing for the future? And there appears to us to be marketing, social media, photography seems to have quite a lot of interest at the moment, and they actually encapsulate quite a lot of skills. So there's a lot of creativity in it. There's digital within that. There's communication. You've got to write assignments and stuff like that. So I've actually set some of my team to see if they could work together across curriculum to create something along the digital marketing and media route, which includes photography, which we can start those non-accredited pathways, but also develop into higher level courses that will naturally progress to what the university and the colleges offer. And I think, as I say, that will develop. You can easily develop from website design into coding, because there's a bit of coding within a website design and stuff like that. So it's not coming out there and saying you've got to learn coding because you've got to do this, but it's a soft way, if you like, of introducing the skills that we're going to need moving forward to what we need now. We also need to start looking at some science-based stuff a bit more, but those teachers are incredibly hard to recruit. So I've started talking to York College about some partnership work where they loan me a tutor, if you like, who's experienced in that, who can start some non-accredited stuff with us, but lead into progression courses with themselves. So I'm working on that at the moment. I don't know if I'm going to get that achieved, but it's certainly a pathway that I'm looking at and challenging on.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ange. Yeah, science teachers like hen's teeth. I just like to finish with a question for myself, and potentially Councillor Smalley can aid with this one as well. On page 18, so paragraph 15, it says the impacts of COVID have brought the need of the service to have its own venue into ever sharper relief. Fully accessible and highly visible adult learning base. I mean, as a ward councillor, I've knocked on many a door when we were talking about what to do with a particular venue in my own ward. And actually, I was quite surprised by the number of local residents who said, well, there's nothing really for adult education, where there's no sort of centre, no sort of focus. And I really just sort of the last sentence is I don't know, mildly ominous, and it says officers continue to consider potential options. And I wonder if Ange, Councillor Smalley, if you just wanted to sort of comment on where we're going with this. Ange, do you want to go first?
I'll let Ange go first. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've been asking for a while. I do believe that originally we were introduced, and we were going to use school buildings as because they're already there, they've got the equipment, and we would use them as the adult education base, which is what we have done for 20 years. But schools have changed a lot since then. They've a lot become academies. They don't have to have us in anymore. And as an adult, our adults are more choosy now. They want to learn in an environment that's suitable for them. They don't want to be in a classroom where the heating's not on. They want to have nice equipment. They want to have a nice coffee lounge that they can go to during the break. And it's getting harder and harder to sell those courses without the right environment. On top of that, the Future Skills Agenda raises a real need to bring people back to lifelong learning and to reskill and upskill. And I think adults deserve a place to do that, and to have something that says, look, here we are, come in and ask about it, come in and find it. So I have been looking at venues, and I've been, Charlie's well aware, and he's been keeping his ear to the ground if anything comes up, and so is Daryl. So that's really where it's all started from.
Councillor Smalley, there's the challenge. Have you got
Angie's
anything to
covered
add?
it. I entirely agree with Angie. I'm not going to disagree at all. And I think that last sentence, while slightly ominous, is perfectly true. I think there isn't anything that's either been ruled out or we've found a solution. And I completely agree with Angie. The provision is so broad, massive, and spread right across the city, from being based at Clifton and Acombe Explore, West Offices, Huntington School, and various other locations. If that was all consolidated, yes, you'd need a secondary school style space. And I know other other authorities obviously have that, and we've not got that at the moment, at least. And I think if you ever are fortunate, maybe when restrictions ease, to go to where the Roots program's based, which whilst I believe we rent it, had significant investment to make it completely, in essence, purpose built. And you can see when York Learning and the council start with a blank sheet of paper, we know exactly what to do, and it is a really, really good learning environment with everything that service needs. I think that the last sentence sort of sums it up, and it will also many other things going on at the moment will alter that. So, for instance, looking at West Office's use in its entirety will influence all of this, as will the 2 capital schemes out at Clifton and Acomb Explore. If I could, just because I'm unmuted, separate, but just to say, massive thanks to Angie and the whole York Learning team. It is, I say this to Angie and to everyone, but it is always so nice to be briefed and hear about what York Learning are up to, and you can never quite predict what they've done each week, because they're always up to something that's always a bit wild, exciting, and innovative. And finally, just to say that the initial accommodation asylum seeker programme that hopefully members have heard about came to an end, not last Friday, but the Friday before. And what York Learning did there was absolutely astounding. It was 80 men, but 80 different men, because people were coming and going and leaving that programme and being transferred from York into dispersal authorities. And managing, you've got a certain cohort that were really enjoying the ESOL provision, but that cohort's changing, and the fluctuations in whether you could do online learning versus in-person learning in a hotel environment, let alone a school environment, was incredibly impressive. And there'll be a public report going to a decision session where hopefully we can really shout about what York Learning did there. But it was absolutely fantastic, and not many authorities, part of the initial accommodation programme, got that so right. And that was credit to Angie, Fiona, and the rest of York Learning's team.
Thank you. Can I just add, sorry, I'm really sorry, but the thing that we really noticed during COVID was that to return to a venue, we needed to make sure that it was obviously COVID secure, that it was clean, that we had all the processes in place to monitor who came in and who came out. And we use a lot of community venues that weren't able to provide that for us. And so we couldn't return to venues for a wide part of the offer because it wasn't available. And that's why it really highlighted to us during COVID. I also am not suggesting that we put all the offer under one roof, because we are community based. It's just about having an identity in a place where people can identify with adult learning, if you like, rather than sixth form.
I think you're right there, Ange, and thank you for everything you've been doing. Now, it was agreed by this committee about a year ago that you would bring a yearly report. So it seems quite strange that you won't be here for a year, and I'm already putting offers of things in. But I think it would be good for next year, if we don't see you before, to think about obviously in a year's time, what's happened since COVID and how have we opened back up. But also I think there's something really important about digital inclusion, because you're working with some of the most vulnerable people in our city, and I think that that's been something that you've highlighted that has been an issue that you've dealt with quite well, but actually how do we keep that going? So that will be my thoughts about maybe something to talk about. I don't know if anybody else has got any last minute thoughts. No, we've silenced the crowds, which is brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, Ange, for all your work. And as I say, you don't have to stay to listen for the rest of the meeting, but it's entirely up to you. And so, committee, we will now move directly on to item 6. Item 6, we have got Barbara Manns and Tim Wardby joining us, hopefully. Barbara is the Head of Early Years and Childcare Service, and Tim is a Community and Partnerships Officer. And this item is something that we asked for relatively recently because it's a relatively new pot of money that became available, and it is about holiday activities and food program that was introduced at very last minute by the government. And there was a bit of a trial run at Easter, and then we're sort of looking tonight to maybe hear a little bit more about what's going on over summer. So Barbara, Tim, I'm not sure who's kicking off.
Yeah, I'm going to introduce it, if that's all right, and thank you for meeting with us today. So yes, the Holiday Activity and Food Programme is a brand new government programme. It's got a really high priority within government, and it's aimed at children aged 5 up to 16 who are on free school meals, so that they can be supported to eat healthy, be active, take part in enriching activities, and be safe, but also be with their friends, which is what we've talked about earlier as well, and to support their well-being. So the government announced at the end of last year that they were rolling out the programme to all local authorities across the country, and we were allocating York 383,000, and that's based on the January headcount free school meal children, so it's 3,349 children. So for the 2 years prior, the government had been working with pilot local authorities, and our understanding from the regional meetings and the national meetings that Tim and I have attended is that they are still building a robust offer out there. So it does take time to scale up the offer, and obviously those other authorities had to contend with the pandemic coming in their second year as well. So that's delayed some of that sort of bigger and wider offer for them. But I think for York, we're very fortuitous because we've got a really rich landscape of activity providers, and we've got the out of school providers, the registered providers across the city, and also Tim, from his Shine days, has got those relationships, and the LAT teams have relationships with the activity providers and also the community side of things as well, and so we've got a lot to build on in York. So we sort of stepped a toe in the water at Easter, and we had a test of what we could deliver, but there were still COVID restrictions at that time, and we had many providers that were still in lockdown or just emerging actually. So we worked with 2 main providers and a food provider, and we had 62 children that engaged first time round. So that we felt that was really positive. And from the outset, we've had a steering group who've been helping us with implementation, and that's chaired by Maxine Squire, the Assistant Director for Education and Skills. So we've got very broad representation on that group. So in preparation for the summer holiday activities, we've taken learning from what's happened at Easter in York, and also from the region and nationally, to inform the summer holiday provision. And the plans are now well underway, and Tim has commissioned over 20 providers to deliver during that time frame. And obviously we'll be able to answer any questions about that detail. The comms are ready to go live from Monday, so there'll be links to the ROK website and the york.gov.uk website, and also a link to the new Marcus Rashford video, because he's heavily promoting the holiday activity programme. And the referrals, they'll come via schools because they know who those eligible children are, and they'll signpost them on to those activities. So in terms of risks for the HAF programme, we know as of last night with the national announcement that the restrictions should lift on the 19th of July, and that should be positive for the holiday activities. But we had asked them to bear that in mind and to make alternative arrangements. So they had that in place in line with the guidance and also with their own risk assessment. But it does look more positive for all of those activities. And I think we've already had quite a bit of interest from children and families to some of the providers as well. So that's just to give you an overview, but we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Barbara. Tim, do you have anything you want to just add at this point, and then we'll...
Yeah, it might help to kind of situate where we are regionally. I've been attending some of the regional hubs set up by Childcare Works, who are managing the overall scheme nationally on behalf of the DFE. And York's in quite a good place compared to our regional neighbours, in that we're kind of predicting we're going to have capacity, if you like, on the summer scheme for at least about half of the eligible children and young people. Kind of worked that out by taking a number of actual days available. Back in my old Shine days, I used to consider one day and any one activity as 1 point, if you like. So we're reaching nearly 3,000 days of activity just on the summer half programme. So that kind of equates to really almost a day per eligible young person. Regionally, as I say, they're nowhere near that in some of our neighbouring authorities. There was a poll the other week where they asked us to predict kind of the percentage of how many eligible children we think we might predict would engage through the summer. Ourselves and another authority were roughly about 50%, with the rest of them, of which there are probably about another 6, we're really sort of predicting quite low numbers around the 25% mark. And there's a range of reasons for that, partly because I think some authorities have struggled to engage enough providers. I think it was Barnsley that was saying that they just simply didn't have enough providers to meet the sheer demand of children on free school meals. In York, we're quite lucky in that proportionately we don't have that many compared to other authorities, as you can imagine. And coupled with our quite diverse and quite hefty, if you like, range of provision that we've kind of developed over many years, we've been able to meet quite a good target. So those two things combined have meant that we've done quite well comparatively. Having said that, I think there are still challenges. So what we did was put an initial grant scheme, a grant application out in a phase 1, if you like, of seeing what would come back. And then we're able to kind of target where there were any gaps, either geographically or in age groups. So there wasn't much came back for the older children and young people, as is often the case. So we're able to work with a couple of providers to put something else on. I know 2 of the secondary schools are now having one of my providers called Speed Kicks, just came back online after lockdown, and it's going to provide some activities in 2 of the secondaries, as I say. I mean, that's the other thing. All these providers are kind of emerging from lockdown, as everybody is. So that particular company were closed through lockdown, and I've only just come back online, as I say. It's been, I think the providers have been a little bit tentative as well in promising anything over the summer, because they haven't really been sure what was going to be possible, alongside a lot of people just bringing the staff back from furlough. Our usual suspects, as you can imagine, the York City Knights and the York Football Foundation are the big hitters, if you like. They're taking the lion's share of the provision, as they always do. And alongside them, we've got some other big sports providers like Total Sports, who you might have heard of, alongside some more community-based and smaller providers such as St Nick's, TCV, Theatre Royal. Obviously, they were in our pilot scheme and did some fantastic work in the schools, which was quite tricky because we're in still quite a phase of lockdown at that point. So how they managed that was working within school bubbles and just taking eligible children from those bubbles and not mixing them, and just offering a theatre activity to very small numbers of children and young people. So a lot of the grants that we got back were again, kind of aimed at small numbers, particularly those that were indoors, because they were still kind of had that feeling that we might be under some kind of restrictions. So that I suppose they were kind of future-proofing any grants that they were putting in at that point. I think that's all I can update you on at the minute. I should say a little bit about SEN as well. So I'm having some conversations with some of the schools in the very near future, our special schools, Applefields, Hobmore and Danesgate, just to see how we can kind of really drill down into what they might be able to offer. It's getting quite late in the day, quite well aware of that, but that's not to say there isn't still time for us to do something a little bit more specialist. One example from Suffolk, was that they were topping up some of the short breaks money with some of the HAF funding, which is probably something we might choose to look a little bit more in depth at, as to see if that's a possibility. Had some conversations this morning with Anne Stamp at Snappy, I'm sure some of you know, around how we can kind of build their capacity. It's a tricky one because there's massive demand at the minute for SCN places on activities, to the extent that we're struggling to meet what would be a normal summer, if you like. So added anything else in extra like the HAF is going to be a bit of a challenge, I think. But we're having those conversations and we're looking at ways to do that.
Thank you, Tim. And I think, Barbara, Tim, it is impressive what you've managed to pull together in what is an incredibly short space of time for things like this. So thank you. I am going to go to questions. I'm going to go to Councillor Barker first.
Thank you. Tim, Barbara, brilliant report. Thank you very much indeed. I had a couple of questions. Tim, you very kindly answered one of them for me already. It says in your report there are some gaps for the 14+ age group. Can I ask what sort of steps you've taken to plug those gaps?
So that was one of the first gaps that we noticed from when the grants came back. And one of them, as I said, was to go back to the providers and have some more conversations with the latecomers to the grant process. So Speed Kicks was one of the companies that had just come back online after lockdown. I happen to know the proprietor, Andy, and he asked me what he could do for me. And I said, well, you know, we're struggling for this age group. If there's anything you can do for that, or if there's any schools that you know of or you're already working with, that would be an easy win for us to put some activity there. So he came back with a couple of grants applications in for 2 of the secondaries. And that was one of the ways that we targeted the older age range. It's worth also kind of talking about, we would have liked, in an ideal world, for the HAF programme to sort of extend throughout the year, because the older age groups notoriously are difficult to engage in the warmer summer months. They're likely to be off with their friends in reality, and they're less likely to be engaged in organised activities. So it's going to be a bit of a tricky one to target that age group. One of the ways in which some of authorities have tackled that is to go to where those young people are already accessing, so your sports clubs, your boxing clubs, your football, all that kind of thing, and asking those clubs to do something with the HAF funding. York has a bit of a deficit in your traditional youth clubs these days, and we're trying to combat that at the minute. I'm trying to bring a couple more back to life that went away 20 odd years ago at the minute. And that's kind of where I think we might struggle. But as I said, that there's ways and means around it. Speaking with some of the secondaries as well, I mean, we have I think it's a deputy head from, I've gone blank, the whole road.
Archbishop Hallgates.
Thanks, Barbara. Archbishop Hallgates, he's on the steering group. So we have a little bit of an inroad into there. We did get some applications from a certain place like Door 84, who are always really good at targeting that older age range. And they've got quite a big programme with quite a few places on, so we can always kind of direct young people from other parts of the city to there. And I think with this programme particularly, it's one to look at how children and young people, particularly older ones, are kind of willing or can be encouraged to move around the city as well to access things that might not be as local as they perhaps might like.
Thank you. My final question to you. You mentioned Shine magazine, and I have to admit, I miss it. Sitting there with my kids and a highlighter pen, scribing through what we're going to do for them. Are we going to see that coming back to us?
That's not a question for me to answer.
Okay.
All I can say is I'm here.
Tim, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Tim's got the highlighters ready, but yeah. Thank you for that, Councillor Barker. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. And yeah, it's very impressive, as Councillor Webb said, to be providing this. Exactly right. I think we'd all support the work that you're doing here. I used to be a national director for the Clubs for Young People, which were originally before that the boys' clubs. you know, in the days when boxing was thought to be okay or whatever, got kids off the streets. Yeah, so I mean, I've always been involved in youth work, and I would agree with you absolutely about the need for youth clubs and actually finding people to run them. That's the difficulty, I suppose. So looking at what you're doing, I mean, again, I think it's great, and I will make the point that I think it's good that this is directed at need, really, and we're not looking at award funding for sort of random things, which we get very annoyed about. This is going to hit those that need it most, regardless of where they might be in the city, which is good. I just want to go back a little bit about over the Easter thing and ask a little bit more about Clifton, really. There's not a lot there. It was just basically better attendance at Westfield. What conclusion did you draw from that, other than the fact that you had an established programme maybe at Westfield?
There's a very good answer to that, and I'm afraid it's there's a certain gentleman that was at Clifton who is now at Westfield, who is part of the pastoral team, and is a bit of a Pied Piper, so that the kids will go where he is. So I can tell you the Westfield activities did well because it was a chance to spend a few days with this gentleman. The activities themselves seem to be kind of secondary. I mean, it's worth mentioning as well that the way we realised that this would work through the Easter pilot was in schools where they have very strong pastoral teams, and there is very much a difference between all the schools as to how they work and how well they know some of the families. I mean, some schools in the city might have only one eligible young person for the HAF programme, and others have 150. So that we knew that the schools would interact with this very differently. But yeah, in answer to your question, personalities perhaps is the reason, maybe. But I mean, as well, I think there needs to be quite a bit of market development of the HAF programme. It's a very new programme, and a lot of families still won't know that it's there. So I think we need to treat this summer as a pilot as well, and keep that in mind. And not I almost want to say not expect too much, because the work that really needs to be done there is that kind of marketing of getting people to know that it's there, alongside as well avoiding any stigma, because the DfE are very clear, and I'm sure they'll all agree, we don't want this to be the poor kids' activities. You know, the DfE are very clear that they want children to access activities alongside their peer groups and their friends. So that kind of needs to be kept in mind. So I kind of got the feeling from the DfE that if there are kids that are accessing stuff that might not necessarily be eligible but are friends of friends, then that's kind of okay. We want to keep those friendships and those friends groups together.
Good. Well, good luck then. As you say, you can't predict how it's going to go over the summer, but I just hope it all goes very well, because it's admirable. So well done.
Yeah, we just need the rain to stay away.
Yes.
A Great British summer will be fine. Councillor Orrell.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tim. Hi, Barbara. Just to confirm what Tim said, having been on Zoom meetings with the teacher involved, it was quite clear why Westfield had such successful rates, and it was principally down to the involvement of this person. It's impressive how it's developed over not many weeks since I last had briefings, probably in May, how far you've come from there. And I think the committee should be aware that it has, from the beginnings of the Easter programme, seems to have developed so much in that short period. And yeah, I just hope everything goes well for you, Tim.
Thank you.
So you're getting a lot of praise here, Tim, Barbara. I think, luckily Councillor Fenton's going to ask a difficult question. Councillor Fenton.
I'll start by heaping more praise on Barbara and Tim for what they're doing. I suppose looking at this, it seems to me to be an opportunity through the links that you're making and the provision that you're commissioning, albeit for a short window of time, my mind was sort of thinking ahead to how can we not kind of lose the learning from this and lose the connections and just see this as, oh, we'll dust it off again in 12 months time for the next summer holiday, because because we know the need is all year round, and you've already identified the difficulties with identifying provision for sort of 13, 14 years of age plus, particularly during the months of the year that when the sun isn't shining and people aren't necessarily sitting in a group on the Knavesmire or wherever. So what, I suppose what the momentum from the work that you're doing now, and to really build on it and to work with community involvement officers out in the wards who then have the link to counsellors and so on and so forth. Maybe just quite understandably focused on delivering this programme, but have you had a chance to think about, well, what do we do when it's done, and how do we try and keep momentum going somehow? Thank
you. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, it's a good question, and to be honest, because we have the Christmas period as well, that's going to look very different to summer. It's enabled us to give us that little bit of time in between, and what we're doing is the most challenging thing is how to provide the food, and that's been a tricky one. I've been really surprised and encouraged by how our providers have got their heads around that quite quickly and have teamed up with other providers to be able to deliver food. The DFE are quite keen that it's hot food, which in some of the outdoor activities, which most of them are, is a nightmare. Because things need to, I should explain as well, things need to follow the school food standards and also have obviously food hygiene certificates behind that of whoever's delivering. Also needs to have allergen policies around what's being delivered. And currently a lot of the community cafes that we have might not be quite up to speed with everything that they might need to deliver this kind of level of provision to children. But it does give us that window to do that development work with those places. So moving forward, and fingers crossed we get this money again for next year, we'll have had that time to work with a lot of the community provision, community cafes, such as your Foxwood drop-ins, and there's a new one in the Clifton area. It's not my area, but I think there's a new community cafe coming around that area. That we'll be able to work with and develop, and hopefully they'll be possibly the main providers of the HAF programme next year. So, for example, a place like Newcastle, which have huge numbers of eligible children and families, roll this out mostly through the community hubs and the community organisations and volunteer groups. And that's probably how I see this developing. So the activities might eventually become a little bit of sideline and a bit of a hook, if you like, to bring families in to receive the food provision. I think looking ahead, that's probably the vision for it, and that's the ideal. As Barbara says, some authorities have been delivering this since 2018, and that's the way it seems to have developed in some of the more populated areas of children that are eligible, as I say. And we're quite lucky in that we've got providers like City York Foundation, who have been doing the holiday hunger again since 2018. So some of our providers are quite well skilled in delivering this already. So I mean, fingers crossed we do get it again, because I think this year will be a struggle in terms of hitting the targets, if you like, that DFE have set. But given a little bit of time over the next few months, it's got a lot of potential, I think.
I think there's also potential with, making that contact with Helen Wynne as well. With the recovery programme, we've got common objectives there. Those relationships with activity enrichment providers, that could support children going forward.
Thank you. And I don't know. All right, it can be my job to ask the slightly, difficult question, I guess. Part of this funding, I imagine, came about because, quite frankly, we mentioned him earlier, Marcus Rashford, and many other organisations shamed the government into actually, trying to deal a little bit with child poverty and particularly through the pandemic. Obviously, last summer there was some free school meal provision. There was a voucher scheme, That then ended, and then very quickly this scheme was identified in a sense to try and avoid those accusations of something's not going on. Now, I'm not asking you to answer questions about that, but if we compare last summer to this summer, where obviously there was a much more extensive free school meal voucher system, and then this summer where we've got a system that there is an activity and there is sort of a food offer attached to that. You know, how do those two things compare in terms of feeding numbers of children? Because this is one of the huge worries, that for our children, for those, you know, over 3,000 children who are desperately hungry when they're not in school, you know, how are we matching that up? How is this going to compare to last year? I told you it was a difficult question. I'm sorry. Does anyone want to have a go? Oh, you can always almost guarantee Maxine's going to pop up at some point. Right? Yes, Maxine. I was kind of waiting for you there. There's a brief pause. Go on.
Yeah, what we have plans to do is that we will provide 2 weeks of vouchers, and that they would, because the HAF program is designed to run across 4 weeks of the summer.
Yeah.
What we want to do is ensure good take-up of the HAF program by saying that, you know, sort of one of the benefits of getting involved is that there is food attached to it. So we are going to do the 2 weeks either side of that with vouchers. That's the plan.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Maxine, for sort of jumping in. And I think it is worth making that point that, you know, this is a scheme that Tim, Barbara, I think is absolutely fantastic, but this can't be a mask for what is some absolutely horrific poverty, and I'm, you know, I'm not saying that that's what this is, and it has to be something separate. So Maxine, that's very helpful to know. Members, do we have any more questions on this particular item? It is 7:32. Okay, I just want to finish by saying, Tim and Barbara, I think the work that has gone, we've all said it, but the work that has gone into this in a really short space of time is absolutely fantastic. And I really do hope that even if you couldn't or didn't want to come and report back to the committee in sort of September, October time or something like that, I think it would be fantastic to get a sort of an update or a report on how it went, and actually, as Councillor Fenton was asking, you know, what we've learnt over the summer and over the Easter as that program's happened at that point. And I think that'd be really, really useful. So thank you. And
we would also, as well, Councillor, use it as an opportunity to brief you on the plans for Christmas, because we are starting that as well.
Hey,
in the steering group.
We're all
plan that.
Yeah. We past the longest day of the year, and we're already planning Christmas. That's what we like to do, isn't it? Brilliant. Okay, no, but I think that would be great. And we don't have the work plan as an item on this agenda, but I do think that it would be something that we might want to.
And we certainly do feel that offering a hot meal in the Christmas period is going to be really, really important.
And the sooner, you know, the sooner we're talking about that, the better. So yes. Thank you very much, and thank you all. Okay. In terms of just sort of bringing this meeting to a close now, because that is our last item on the agenda. He says, he hopes, yes. I just thought that I'd just sort of summarise with item 4, the report from YSAB. I think it would be good, Maxine, to potentially get an update to committee on the report, on the questionnaire, the results of that questionnaire, even if that was just circulated amongst members.
Sort of with the minutes. Fine to do that. It landed in our inboxes yesterday, so we haven't had too much time to have a look at it yet.
So I didn't think that I didn't want to push on that one too much, but I thought it'd be really good for us to see what parents, children and teachers are saying around that.
We have got a meeting of the recovery group tomorrow, so I'll feed that back to Helen and we'll get something turned around quickly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I think my dog's just going wild behind me there. In terms of item 5, we talked about sort of digital inclusion, and I noticed that people have been making notes about what will come next year, so that'd be good. And then, yeah, as I said just a minute ago, for item 6, just maybe a report back in after the summer, and a report on what's coming next for Christmas will be really, really helpful. Okay. Right, folks, as you can possibly hear, my dog's running around, so she clearly needs to go out. So unless anyone's got anything to say, I think we can finish there. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the officers who weren't on screen, have been helping tonight, and I'll bring this meeting to a close. Thanks, folks. Have a nice evening.